everyone. My name is Alyssa Ricky, and I'm joined by Colleen Pollitt. Colleen and I are doctoral candidates at the University of Florida studying special education. On behalf of the TED Diversity Caucus, we are so thrilled with the opportunity to interview Dr. Joyce Gomez-Najarro. Hello, Joyce. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Colleen and Alyssa. I really appreciate it.
Yay, we're so excited. So we wanted to start this interview by asking, just tell us about your role and your institution.
Oh, great. So I very recently made the transition from assistant professor to associate professor. Thank you. I'm at California State University, Fullerton, which is in Orange County, really close to Disneyland. I'm in the Department of Literacy and Reading Education.
Awesome. And then, so tell us a little bit about your scholarly interests in your work, in the practice and work you do.
Sure. So I'm really interested in teachers' conceptualizations of assessment. So like not only what kinds of tools they're using, but their thinking behind the use of those tools. Like, why are you using them? How are you using them? What's your thinking in the analysis of the data? What's your thinking in relationship to what you know about your students? How do you use assessment to get to know your students? So that's something that I'm really interested in and passionate about. I'm also interested in culturally responsive and sustaining approaches to literacy and reading instruction, particularly in the context of response to intervention. So like, how are teachers and educators thinking about RTI, particularly in the system, like broader systems of MTSS? What do those models look like? How are they shaped in relation to the context in which they're in and what they're learning about their students and their school community? And also, I'm really excited to just explore issues of social justice and teacher education. In the College of Ed at Cal State Fullerton, we really are committed to this idea of just, equitable, and inclusive education, or JEIE. So for me in particular, I'm really interested in exploring these different approaches to developing transformative, just, equitable, and inclusive models of teacher education. So those are some of the questions that I'm really interested in and tend to gravitate toward.
Awesome. When you were talking about, analyzing assessments, I immediately was thinking of like RTI or MTSS in really understanding your students and teachers' ability to analyze and then inform their instruction, which is the whole reason that, that process was developed.
Yeah, it's a really dynamic context. Absolutely.
Yes. How does your teacher education pedagogy address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion? I saw you touched on that a little bit, but in relation to your teacher education pedagogy, how do you address those topics?
Well, so in terms of my pedagogy, I have to say that a lot of my thinking comes through this framework of intersectionality. Like Kimberlé Crenshaw's work on intersectionality has, for me, been a really powerful framework, and in that it helps us, or calls for us, to really recognize the complexity in the context of education, the complexity of student identity as well as teacher and educator identity. And how like data and instructional models can sometimes even perpetuate compartmentalize, like how do these traditional systems in education like perpetuate compartmentalized understandings of identity. So for instance, disaggregating demographic data when we're engaged in data analysis, for instance, in the context of RTI. Another example would be silos between general and special education. And so when I'm thinking about my own pedagogy, I'm thinking about like, how can I disrupt that, and how can I invite my students, who are often graduate students and service teachers working in these systems as well, how can we unpack that and think about what implications it has for our instruction, because also recognizing that intersectionality helps us see how multifaceted and dynamic social identity really is. So, and so how does that shape students' meaning making and literacy learning? So again, I'm often teaching courses about literacy instruction and literacy data analysis. So just to give some context. So how does intersectionality help us see the complexity of identity in relation to systems of power and oppression? How does this impact all of our students, in particular students from historically marginalized social groups who might be experiencing compounded levels of oppression, and again, in the context of this work that my graduate students are often doing in relation to literacy and assessment. So some important things that I try to aim for are to, one, develop a better understanding of culturally responsive and sustaining assessment and instruction. And one of the things that I think is monumentally important is like developing that critical lens. So how can I prepare or support my grad students to develop a critical analysis or critical evaluation of the traditional practices and tools that they encounter in their respective school communities. So for instance, one of the assignments that we have, or one of the learning experiences that I try to develop, is this critical evaluation of some of the assessments that they're familiar with, or that they have questions about, or that they want to learn more about. So some of the experiences that we have involve selecting an assessment that's meaningful to you, that you have questions about, going through research to analyze that assessment in terms of validity, reliability, in particular in relation to serving culturally and linguistically diverse students or students with diverse academic needs, and recognizing the strengths of a particular tool, but also the limitations, and considering how do you account for those limitations, like whether that's multiple measures or supplementing it with other forms of assessment, or really pushing back on some of the assessments. So not only understanding like what we're doing at our school site, but why we're doing it, and problematizing it, right? And feeling empowered to like do something about something that we've problematized and see as like maybe harmful to students. So really trying to generate those questions in the context of synchronous Zoom courses, but also in learning experiences and assignments. I also try to create opportunities for teachers to really engage in self-reflection and inquiry. So creating spaces for them to like critically examine their own identities, but also to like celebrate their own identities. So I have another assignment for a different course that entails or invites them to consider their own conceptualizations of literacy. Like, what is literacy, and how do your own experiences as a literacy learner shape that, and also in particular in relation to your own social identities and experience and your own narrative? Like, how has your own journey with literacy shaped the way you think about it, and in turn the way you approach literacy instruction, like what practices you're using. So really to give folks an opportunity to think about the relationship between their experiences and how they create spaces for literacy learning in their classrooms, to then also self-reflect and problematize, celebrate the things that are really intentional and relate to or align with some of the research that we're reading and engaging in, but also to reconsider practices that maybe haven't problematized in the past. Also, I think an important element of that is, again, exploring the relationship between theory and practice. So a lot of my courses also include fieldwork experiences. So I really appreciate the opportunity they have at the beginning of the semester to engage in a case study. Essentially, they're working one-on-one with students to really focus on humanistic approaches to literacy assessment and instruction. Like, what have you learned about this one kiddo? Like, what makes them so special? What makes them excited about literacy learning? And what implications does that have for the books that you're selecting, or the activities that you have, or the discussion questions that you're generating? So being very intentional about what they're doing in relation to serving the unique needs of this particular student. So we have conversations about there's reflection activities. And then finally, I think collaboration and dialogue is a huge element of that work as well in terms of pedagogy. So in these graduate courses, it tends to be a completely online experience, an online program. And so for us, that means collaboration and dialogue through like breakout rooms and Zoom, also asynchronous activities like on Google Docs or Jamboard, like whatever the medium, it's an opportunity to do the same thing that we're doing in person, which is like really having conversations about our own understandings of literacy assessment and data and instruction, and really like working together across these traditional silos to really think about how are we drawing from our respective areas of expertise to really develop the most effective plans possible for the unique needs of our individual students. So collaboration, critical evaluation, self-reflection, those are some of the key elements that I try to include in some of these courses that I'm developing or continue to hopefully develop and refine each semester.
That's great. And I think all of those things, it really, for me, highlighted how, you know, these topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it doesn't just exist on its own, right? That intersectionality you talked about, it's so embedded in every facet of education. So all of that is, it's a really important work. But with that work, I'm sure you've come across your fair share of challenges in doing this work. Are there any challenges that you can share and maybe how you've overcome them, or some advice that you might have for junior scholars who are interested in teaching for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, I will say that the complexity of this work is quite clear, and we see that in these like micro and macro levels, right? In many ways, like everything from pushback on critical race theory, police brutality, inequities that I think were magnified during the pandemic. Like we see that there's a lot of work to be done. And sometimes that work can seem so monumental, especially in terms of personal experiences. Like if you're, you know, working with someone who's kind of pushing back on some of these ideas about like self-reflection or just equitable, inclusive education. But at the same time, we see advocates who are consistently rising up in the face of this adversity. And that is so inspiring and empowering. And I think this is why I see dialogue and collaboration as key elements of my work. It's that collaboration with folks who have similar passions and interests and commitments that really gives you that fuel, I think, that you need to kind of like feel hopeful and know that things are gonna get better, or things are like change is gonna happen. So for me, that's taken the shape of like collaborative research experiences. So I've worked on some things on my own, but I really appreciate the chance to work with others, really, you know, to like engage in those conversations, to push back on each other's ideas. I also try to co-plan with colleagues. So like in our department, we often have conversations about like so as students transition, so as students within a cohort are transitioning through each of our respective courses, what does that look like? How are we building upon those experiences? How are we, excuse me, helping them make connections between the ideas that we're thinking about and talking about? So that also includes like mapping some of our fieldwork experiences. And so you're always kind of going back to the drawing board and seeing like what works, what doesn't work. And that has to be collaborative, because you want your graduates to leave the program feeling like they've really gained this experience that will help them serve as literacy leaders in their communities. And also reading organizations. I had the privilege of serving as president of the Orange County Reading Association this past academic year. And they're just a team of folks who are really passionate about literacy learning. So teachers, we had administrators, scholars who work to develop professional development opportunities. For these past 2 years, it's been on Zoom, but it's also traditionally face-to-face. Also working with communities. So one thing we did last summer was we got someone who's just like amazing at family literacy, and we partnered with an organization, like essentially a family resource center that was able to connect us with families, so parents and their children or students, to really like share and co-construct ideas about family literacy, what that might look like. And so all of those collaborations have just been a key part of what I do and have helped me kind of navigate some of those trickier or more challenging experiences that can come about on just work that's big. It's big. We have a lot of work to do, but it's just so inspiring to see folks who are just like doing amazing things.
Absolutely. So kind of think in that realm of collaboration, thinking about TED specifically and the Diversity Caucus, how has that helped you with your teaching, and what role do you see organizations like this having in navigating teacher education?
Well, kind of going back to like what I was sharing in terms of like my experiences with OCRA, I think these kinds of organizations just really play a key role in helping folks share ideas, co-construct concepts or plans. And so for me personally, one of the resources that I tend to turn to like most are the teaching resource center materials that are posted online. So those are just, I mean, there's something really cool about like having a space where folks who are just as passionate about you about the same things and have the same commitments are like sharing, this is what I found, this is what I'm doing, this is what was working for me, this is what, and to just like have everything in one space and to have different perspectives shared. So like, for instance, helpful links to the Iris Center, to the Cedar Center, just like all right there. There's sample syllabi, there's recordings on different topics, such as I think one that I saw recently was on publishing. So just having a space where you can like kind of have a sense of what the conversation is and how it's changing and how it's developing, and to kind of consider how that connects with what you're doing, or how to kind of shape your ideas about what you want to do next, or what might be the next course of action for your work or for your inquiry. There's something really powerful about building those different communities and feeling welcome to participate in those communities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely takes a village to get all of this work done, for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. So before we end, is there anything else you wanted to share with the audience about your work or your practice before we close out?
I'm not sure if I have something in particular to share. I think I just really appreciate this work, and like especially the work that you all are doing, and like gathering these different narratives and creating again like this space, this community. And like earlier, I know we were talking about some of the silver linings of like these Zoom affordances and opportunities. It's been just amazing to be able to connect with families in different ways, to connect with my students in different ways. And in this case, again, we have this chance to connect with folks from across the United States, or maybe even like globally, to kind of get a sense of folks' stories and journeys, and to hopefully, again, like you mentioned earlier, develop that community to continue doing this work. So I guess that would be like my one of the key reflections I've had this past year on like just this a deep appreciation of community in its different shapes and forms.
Absolutely. All right. So our last question for you, Joyce, is we're curious to know, who are some up and coming scholars that you are reading, and what do you find most compelling about their work?
I don't know how I would define up and coming, but I will say someone whose work I've been reading, who I really appreciate, has been Maria Choi Peñas. I believe they're in Montclair State University. So I really like, so some of the articles that I've had the opportunity to come across have included things like well, first I'll say what I appreciate about the work. The work really also seems to illustrate the complexity of social identity, of how these intersecting experiences shape the unique narratives and learning experiences of not only students, but like how that also intersects with families and communities. So Choi Peña's work has included things like remote schooling support for linguistically diverse parents of students with disabilities, and also engaging with culturally and linguistically diverse families from students with different backgrounds, intersectional possibilities of translanguaging and universal design for learning. So I just really appreciate Choi Peña's work in that it illuminates the complexity of the human experience and social identity, and how that's such a key element of what teachers maybe need to consider in terms of like really interrogating or possibly just critically evaluating traditional practices, and how we can see the extent to which it's really honoring the unique funds of knowledge and experiences and levels of expertise that our students or families are bringing to school communities, and how we can really honor that and use that as scholars, teacher educators, to really develop transformative approaches to education that celebrate the uniqueness of our school communities and students, and to really develop authentic, meaningful, empowering learning experiences in school. So yeah, I just really appreciate the nuance of this work, and it's a privilege to be able to read some of that, and to consider like how that's even like shaping my own thinking about the similar questions.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you so much on behalf of the TED Diversity Caucus. We so appreciate the time you took to chat with us today and all the contributions you are making to the field. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.